So on today's episode, we're going to be talking about an Omega level commander. So what exactly is Omega level? Well, Omega level is a classification that actually shows up in comic books, originally talking about mutants and talking about the incredible power of certain mutants that are Omega level above the rest. For example, mutants like Jean Grey, Storm, and Magneto are considered to be Omega level mutants. Regardless if you're a comic fan like I am, a quick shout out to Comics Explained. Make sure you check out their fantastic series on Beyond Omega level characters. But now back to Magic. So on this series, we're going to be talking about Omega level commanders that are incredibly powerful and that are massive threats. And the first episode of this series comes to you courtesy of my amazing patrons. Once a month, patrons vote on what commander that they'd like to see in an upcoming episode. The commander that gets the most votes wins. And then that commander gets an entire deck built around it, and every single card in the deck outside the commander is going to be less than $1, so it's going to be a very budget-friendly and still very powerful deck. And the commander that they selected is definitely worthy of the title Omega level with Lord Xander the Collector. Lord Xander is a 6/6 vampire demon noble that costs 4 blue, black, red. So this commander has a pretty hefty cost, but my goodness does it do a ton for you. Because when Lord Xander the Collector enters the battlefield, target opponent discards half the cards in their hand, rounded down. Whenever Lord Xander attacks, defending player mills half their library, rounded down. And when Lord Xander dies, target opponent sacrifices half the non-land permanents they control, rounded down. Yeah, this commander is a massive threat, and with all those triggers combined, most definitely an Omega level commander. Lord Xander is absolutely incredible with resource denial. Just by coming into play, you get to take out half of an opponent's hand. And of course, there are plenty of ways to use and abuse an ETB like this. And of course, there are also plenty of ways to abuse that second trigger, and actually there are some combinations that basically make a player essentially mill their entire library instead of just half, so one attack from this commander can be deadly. That being said, those combination cards are quite expensive and outside of our $1 budget, but still, even without that trigger or counting on that trigger, the last trigger more than makes up for that. When Lord Xander dies, target opponent sacrifices half the non-land permanents they control, rounded down. This can absolutely decimate one of our opponents, and of course, just like I mentioned with the ETB, we can definitely use and abuse this LTB as well. And many times we can actually do so in combination with the two. So again, Lord Xander is an incredibly powerful commander, one that is absolutely brutal with resource denial. We can decimate our opponent's hands and their boards again and again and again. Now, really quick, before we jump into the cards that are going to make all this possible, a quick reminder. In the description below, you will find the link to the deck list for this commander. And again, the time that I built this deck, every single card is less than $1, so it's a very budget-friendly, but again, still very powerful deck. So with that said, let's jump into the deck. First up, like I mentioned before, we've got ways to use and abuse that ETB that makes an opponent discard half their hand, so we can easily do that with cards like Essence Flux, Siren's Ruse, and Planar Incision. Essence Flux says, exile target creature you control and return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. It also says something about a spirit, but we can ignore that. And again, for just 1 mana, this is an absolutely incredible way to use and abuse our commander's ETB. And keep in mind, this can also be a great way to save our commander from target removal as well. In a similar way, Siren's Ruse is also going to blink our commander. It also says something about, a pirate and drawing a card, but that doesn't really matter. What does matter, again, is blinking. So we've also got Planar Incision, which can blink our commander as well, and it's going to bring it back with a ++1 counter on it. Regardless whether they are 1 mana or 2 mana spells to blink our commander again and get that ETB, they are fantastic. So we've got yet another 2 mana blink spell that can actually blink any permanent we control with Teferi's Time Twist. It says, exile target permanent you control, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, and if it's a creature, gets a +1 counter on it. So this can actually help us save any of our permanents, and actually it's a great way to save our commander for a board wipe if we need to. And then Ghostly Flicker costs 1 more mana, but technically not, because it says exile 2 target artifacts, creatures, and/or lands you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under your control. So the reason I say technically not is if we are blinking just our commander and we need something else to blink, well, we can just blink one of our lands so we can get 1 mana back. Or if we've got a mana rock in play that might be able to tap for more than 1 mana, we can blink that and then utilize it again for even more mana. And of course, also keep in mind that this can also help us heavily utilize other ETBs in the deck as well. That being said, now let's talk about the other part of this commander that we really want to focus on with that death trigger. So of course, we've got some fantastic free sacrifice outlets with cards like Viserys here, Woe Strider, and Dimir Houseguard. Viserys here is a 1/1 vampire wizard that has sacrifice a creature, scry 1. So this is a repeatable sacrifice outlet that can help us get rid of our commander when we need to get that trigger to just decimate an opponent's board. And again, on top of that, we are getting some nice card selection from that scry. Speaking of which, Woe Strider is a 3/2 that has, when it enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 goat creature token, which is nice, but it also has, more importantly, sacrifice another creature, scry 1. So again, the same as Viserys here, but actually on top of that, we can actually escape this from our graveyard for 3 black and exiling 4 other cards to get it back, and it's going to come back into play with 2 counters on it. Next up, a flexible sacrifice outlet though is Dimir Houseguard, a 2/3 skeleton with fear that has sacrifice a creature, regenerate it, and it can transmute for 1 black. So if it's in our hand and we need to go get something else to help us out, well, we can go get another 4 mana card in our deck just by transmuting it. Or again, when it is in play, this is a fantastic sacrifice outlet that again is free and is hard to deal with. Next up though, we've got some more sacrifice outlets with Thought Picker Witch, Vampiric Rites, and Culling Deus. Thought Picker Witch is a 1/1 human wizard that has pay 1, sacrifice a creature, look at the top 2 cards of target opponent's library, then remove 1 of them from the game. This is an incredibly brutal effect, and again, although this is not a free sacrifice outlet, it is very cheap for just 1 mana. This can be a fantastic way to essentially start fate sealing our opponents, because again, we are denying them of resources already by getting rid of a ton of their cards in their hand, and also cards in play, so now we can start setting the top of their library to cards that they don't need. On the opposite side of things though, Vampiric Rites is also a great sacrifice outlet. It's an enchantment that says, pay 1 and a black, sacrifice a creature, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So now sacrificing our commander actually gives us some additional card advantage as well, and some nice life gain too on top of that. Speaking of which, Culling Deus is an artifact that has tap, sacrifice a creature, put a charge counter on Culling Deus, and by paying 1, we sacrifice it and draw a card for each charge counter on it. So this is a free sacrifice outlet that is not repeatable, on the same turn, but is repeatable on multiple turns, and also again, it can just be a great way to build up a ton of charge counters on it to draw a lot of cards when we need to. And one last sacrifice outlet that is fantastic is Makeshift Munitions. It is an enchantment that has pay 1, sacrifice an artifact or creature. Makeshift Munitions deals 1 damage to any target. So this can be a great sacrifice outlet that again is very cheap to activate, and we can also utilize it to take out small creatures, or again to start pinging players' faces. Regardless, being able to sacrifice our commander on demand is a very important thing for this deck. And although our commander does cost a good amount of mana, if we're set up correctly, we won't be paying that commander tax again. Because when we go to sacrifice our commander, we can really utilize cards like Supernatural Stamina, Feign Death, and Undying Malice. Supernatural Stamina says, until end of turn, target creature gets +2/+0 and gains. When this creature dies, returns to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. So for just 1 mana, again, whether our commander is going to die because we sacrifice it, or whether an opponent is trying to deal with it, well, we get our commander back right away. And that means that we not only get its death trigger on it dying, but we also get its ETB again. And of course, again, a huge benefit like I mentioned before, we save on commander tax by just getting our commander right back out without having to repay to get it out. So yeah, for just 1 mana, each of these cards are absolutely doing a ton of work for this deck. And then Feign Death and Undying Malice also bring our creature back, but on top of that, they're going to get it back with a ++1 counter on it. Yeah, we've been getting a lot of these effects lately, and they are incredibly impactful with Lord Xander. So we've also got Return Action, Demonic Gifts, and Abnormal Endurance, which all again are basically the exact same thing in one way or another. For 1 and a black, each of them bring Lord Xander back when he dies. But before that happens, Return Action gives him +1/+0 and lifelink, Demonic Gifts gives him +2/+0, and Abnormal Endurance also gives him +2/+0. Obviously, this is not the main focus for these cards, but they are nice additional benefits. Yet another way to bring our commander back, though, comes with Undying Evil, which says target creature gains Undying until end of turn, which essentially means that when it dies, if it had no +1 counters on it, return to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1 counter on it. And then Fake Your Own Death is an instant for 1 and a black that says, until end of turn, target creature gets +2/+0 and gains. When this creature dies, returns to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control, and you create a treasure token. Regardless of what each of these do, again, at the end of the day, they can really help us use and abuse our commander's ETB and LTB. But one card that is absolutely incredible once we're set up correctly is Myojin of Grim Betrayal. It's a 5/2 spirit that says, Myojin of Grim Betrayal enters the battlefield with an indestructible counter on it if you cast it from your hand. And by removing an indestructible counter from it, you put on the battlefield under your control all creature cards and all graveyards that were put there from anywhere this turn. So first up, like the previous cards that we talked about, we can get our commander back right away with this. And of course, on top of that, this can really help us make the most out of our commander's LTB, again, by making an opponent sacrifice a ton of non-land permanents. Chances are a lot of creatures are going to be sacrificed, and yeah, we can now get all those back under our control. And of course, we've got other ways to take out our opponent's creatures as well that we'll get to here in a bit. So yeah, this can be an incredibly impactful and game-ending play. But now let's move on to card advantage spells for this deck, and ones that work incredibly well with this commander are cards like Village Rites, Altar's Reap, and Costly Plunder. Village Rites is an instant for a single black mana. It says, as initial cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. And then Altar's Reap does the exact same thing but for 1 more mana, and Costly Plunder can do the exact same thing, or we can sacrifice an artifact. Regardless, each of these are great ways to not only draw some cards, but also to take advantage of our commander's LTB. So on top of sacrifice outlets, we've got great cards like this one to ensure that we can make the most out of our commander. So we're also going to be running cards like Reckoner's Bargain and Disciple of Bolas. Reckoner's Bargain says, initial cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature, you gain life field, the sacrifice permanent's mana value, draw 2 cards. So by sacrificing our commander for 2 mana with this, we get to draw 2 cards and gain 7 life. But in an even bigger way though, we've got Disciple of Bolas, which is a 2/1 human wizard that has, when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice another creature, you gain X life and draw X cards where X is that creature's power. So with our commander again, that's draw 6, gain 6, again for just 4 mana, and we are getting that death trigger, and of course again, we've got plenty of ways to get our commander right back. Now, on top of the cards we already talked about, and again, some of those sacrifice outlets that provide card advantage as well, we also have some more traditional card advantage spells like Fact or Fiction, Painful Truths, and Read the Bones. Fact or Fiction says reveal the top 5 cards of your library, and opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, put 1 pile in your hand and the other into your graveyard. And then Painful Truth says you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast this spell. So yeah, again, we're most likely going to be casting this for 3, 1 of each of our colors, and draw 3 and lose 3. And then Read the Bones says scry 2, then draw 2, you lose 2 life. So yeah, each of these are great ways to help us dig further for the cards that we need. Now, some incredible cards for this deck are clone cards like Clone. Go figure. Clone is a 0/0 shapeshifter that has, you may have Clone enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. Now, clones are incredibly impactful with this commander because just with this one card, we are going to be getting both of those triggers that we've been talking about. Because we're going to have our clones enter the battlefield as a copy of our commander. When they do, we're going to get the ETB, again, so we make an opponent discard half the cards in their hand, and then because the legend rule, we have to sacrifice one of them, so we'll sacrifice the clone, and then we get the LTB. So then we make an opponent sacrifice half the non-land permanents they control. And again, we get all of this with just one card for just 4 mana, and again, this is a flexible card, so if we've got another creature with an ETB or something in play that we want to take advantage of, we can, or if an opponent has an incredibly powerful creature, we can do that as well. So yeah, clones are quite incredible, and of course, outside of clone, we've got other ones like Mirror Image, which is basically a clone that can copy our things, and just for 3 mana, and then Evil Twin. Evil Twin has, you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it gains pay blue, black, tap, destroy target creature with the same name as this creature. So if we really want to use this for removal, we can, or just mass removal with our commander works as well. But of course, we're not done with clones just yet. We also have Undercover Operative, a 0/0 shapeshifter rogue that has, you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it enters with a shield counter on it if you control that creature. And again, a shield counter means that if we dealt damage or destroyed, move a shield counter from it instead. And then Vizier Many Faces is also a clone, but one that we can utilize twice because we can embalm it. So this can help us take advantage of our commander's triggers twice again, thanks to bringing it back from our graveyard as a zombie. And speaking of utilizing our commander's trigger more than once, we've got Jaxus the Troublemaker. Now, Jaxus is not a clone, but it can help us make clones. It's a 2/3 human warrior that has pay a red, tap, discard a card, create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card, sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step, activate only as a sorcery. So this is a fantastic, repeatable way to essentially rummage while also making clones that help us get the ETB and LTB for our commander to just decimate our opponents. Yeah, Jaxus is quite good, and keep in mind, it does have Blitz for 1 and a red. Another great repeatable clone effect, though, comes from Mirror Hall Mimic. It's a 0/0 spirit that you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it's a spirit niche to its other types. So on the front side of this is a clone, and when it's in our graveyard, we can disturb it. So by disturbing it for 3 blue, we can cast from our graveyard, and it's going to be Ghastly Mimicry, which is an aura that says enchant creature at the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of enchanted creature, except it's a spirit niche to its other types. And if Ghastly Mimicry be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So again, this is a clone that can just go right into our graveyard after we get our ETB and LTB thanks to copying our commander, that we then can get out of our graveyard to enchant our commander to get more copies of our commander, which will get us more ETBs and LTBs on every single one of our upkeeps. Yeah, this can be quite brutal. And speaking of brutal, let's talk about Sakashima's Will. It's a sorcery that says choose one if you control a commander. As you cast a spell, you may choose both. Target opponent chooses a creature they control. You gain control of it. Choose a creature you control. Each other creature you control becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn. So essentially, we get to steal an opponent's creature, and then, well, we can either choose, another creature that we control, including the one we just stole, or we can choose our commander, and then all of our creatures become a copy of our commander. Which means that every single creature we control outside of our commander is going to be sacrificed thanks to the legend rule, and we get that death trigger for every single one of them. This can be incredibly devastating and can absolutely wipe out our opponent's boards like it was nothing. Another fantastic play, though, comes with Zyndersplit's Judgment, a sorcery that says for each player, choose friend or foe. Each friend creates a token that's a copy of a creature they control. Each foe returns a creature they control to its owner's hand. So with this, obviously, we can make a copy of our commander, but of course, on top of that, by making our opponents have to bounce creatures back to their hands, well, again, by getting our commander's ETB, that is going to make it so our opponents have to discard cards, and they very well might have to discard that creature that just got bounced back. So yeah, we are definitely choosing our opponents as foes. Now, as effective as all these cards are, there is one, in my opinion, that stands above the rest, and that is the Golden Pig of this deck. The Golden Pig is the #1 card out of our 99, and the Golden Pig for this deck is Molten Echoes. Molten Echoes is an enchantment for 2 red that says, as it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever a non-token creature of the chosen type enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of that creature. That token gains haste, exile at the beginning of the next end step. So with this, we're probably going to be choosing, say, Vampire, because again, that is one of our commander's 3 creature types. Regardless, when Lord Xander comes into play now, we get a token copy of it. So whether we are blinking our commander or we're bringing it back again with a Feign Death type of effect, well, we get that ETB and LTB a second time again, thanks to that token copy coming into play. And again, because the legend rule, we have to sacrifice it. So yeah, essentially every single time Lord Xander enters the battlefield, no matter how it happens, we are getting double the triggers. So yeah, there's a reason why this is the Golden Pig of the deck and why it is an incredibly brutal card once you are set up properly. That being said, we also have other ways to interact with our opponents outside of our commander just decimating them with cards like Depart the Realm and Alchemist Retrieval. Depart the Realm says return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and we can foretell it for a blue. And then Alchemist Retrieval has cleave for 1 and a blue, and it says return target non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand, but again, if we cast it for that cleave cost, it takes out that you control. So each of these can be very flexible cards that can either bounce one of our non-land permanents or an opponent's when we need to. And again, if we are bouncing our opponent's non-land permanents, well, sometimes they're going to have to discard those because our commander is going to have them discard a ton of cards. So we're also going to be running Aether Gale, which is going to return 6 target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. And then Necromantic Selection can be incredible with this commander. It says draw all creatures, then return a creature card put into a graveyard this way to the battlefield under your control. It's a black zombie to choose other types, exile Necromantic Selection. So with this, we can wipe out every single creature on the board, and we can also choose to get our commander back, so again, we get that ETB again. And speaking of ETBs and wiping out creatures, well, let's talk about Overseer of the Damned, Butcher, Malakir, and Molten Primordial. Overseer of the Damned has when it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target creature, and whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, create a tap 2/2 black zombie creature token. So again, with all the creatures that we're going to be taking out from our opponents, we can make a massive zombie army with this in no time. And also keep in mind, again, we've got ways to abuse ETBs, so if we need to get this ETB again, we can. Next up, Butcher Malakir can be especially deadly with this deck. It has whenever it or another creature we control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Again, we've got plenty of ways to sacrifice our commander over and over and over again, and of course, whenever we get a clone into play, we can, again, sacrifice that. So yeah, we've got plenty of ways to get this trigger, and again, on top of that, just keep in mind with any of these, yeah, you can also just clone these too, because you've got a bunch of clones in the deck, so having 2 Butcher Malakirs can be incredibly brutal. I mean, 1's already brutal, but 2, My goodness. And speaking of brutal, how about Molten Primordial, a 6/4 hasty avatar that has, when it enters the battlefield for each opponent, gain control of up to one target creature that player controls until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn. So this is basically a triple threaten effect on an ETB, yeah, that of course we can use and abuse, and on top of that, this can actually be a form of removal as well, because we do steal their creatures and swing with them, and even if those creatures don't die in combat again, we've got other ways to sacrifice them, like our sacrifice outlets or our sacrifice spells. Moving on, we've got some counter spells with cards like Negate, Saw It Coming, and Make Disappear. Negate's going to counter target non-creature spell, Saw It Coming can counter any spell, and we can foretell it for 1 and a blue, and Make Disappear can be very good with our commander. It's an instant that has casualty 1, which means as we cast a spell, we can sacrifice a creature with power 1 or greater. When you do, copy the spell and you may choose a new target for the copy. Again, our commander definitely has a power of 1 or greater. And it's going to have us counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. So this is a fantastic way to not only counter a spell, but also to be able to sacrifice our commander with this. And finally, let's talk about the ramp in this deck, and one of the cards can actually help us with card advantage as well with Midnight Clock. It can tap for a blue, and we can pay 2 and a blue to put an hour counter on it. At the beginning of each upkeep, we get an hour counter on it, and when it gets the 12th hour counter on it, we shuffle our hand and graveyard into our library, and we draw 7 cards and exile it. So not only can this ramp us, but it can be a fantastic way to completely refill our hand. And of course, we're also going to be running mana rocks like Felwar Stone, Prismatic Lens, Rakdos Signet, Arcane Signet, Izzet Signet, Charcoal Diamond, and Sky Diamond. Each of these are very efficient mana rocks that can help us fix our mana. And then we've got some mana rocks that can generate us even more mana with Sisay's Ring, Urgolem's Eye, Hedron Archive, Everflowing Chalice, and Firemind Vessel. Again, our commander does cost 7 mana, so yeah, ramping can be quite important. And yes, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, cards from the new upcoming set, Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate, are not included in this deck because at the time of this deck's recording, and at the time of the release of this episode, most likely the set will not have been released just yet. So yes, Stone Speaker Crystal would be a great card if it ends up budget. Yes, it's going to be a great card for this deck as well, so make sure you check that one out. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, every single card in this deck outside of the commander is less than $1. So the estimated cost for this deck is just $31.45. Now keep in mind that this cost does include basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you already have those basics, there's some extra savings for you there. And you also might be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards, because of course those cards need a home too. Now, do keep in mind that the cost of this deck does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.